Shalom, everybody. This is Dave from Universal Truth of Mankind. I am your host, and this is Buyer Beware, where we take the simple English translation of a verse and dig deeper to go beyond just the surface of the verse and look for more meaning below the surface. Now, like I always say, please subscribe to both the Rumble and YouTube Universal Truth of Mankind. Please like and share these videos. Get the word out. It's free. I ask nothing from anybody. Just you don't have to worry about me trying to get into anyone's pockets and, fleece them, like many do. So let's start with the verse that we're going to talk about today. Our verse that we're going to be talking about is from Leviticus chapter 26, verse 15. You can see that up on the left-hand side, the English translation. We use GPS, listen to me, JPS, 1985, which I affectionately call JPS 2.0, where the 1917 version is 1.0. All right, so here we have the interlinear. But let's first read the verse in English, and then we'll delve deeper from there. It says, "If you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments, and you break my covenant." That's all we're going to look at. So we have the interlinear here, and we can see the Hebrew underneath. I don't want to get too far yet in this, but you can take a look at the interlinear, and what I want to point out is notice the word orders don't match what's on the right-hand side, which is the Hebrew of the passage that we're talking about. Let's take a look at this. It says, if you take a look right on top of the icon, you will see nephesh. That's the word that this verse starts with the English translation. But take a look at, here's 15. So we go down one row because it's right to left. There's no nephesh. Still no nephesh. I don't see nephesh there. No nephesh there. Nothing. No nephesh there. No nephesh there. Ah, here's the root, nephesh. You notice that? I had to go in how many words? Well, some of these words are connected, but I had to go in quite a few words before I got to nephesh. There's something to keep in mind when the translators translate and they use an interlinear. The interlinear is supporting the English translation, not necessarily the Hebrew translation. Just something to note for yourselves. Now, why is this? Well, I can give you a real simple example. I am dyslexic. I have no problem telling people that. I have no problem with admitting to it, but I use it as an asset for myself. I had a teacher who was doing a PhD on dyslexics and how they cope with life, particularly in terms of memory, in terms of utilization of dyslexia for to their benefit. Really enjoyed that. So I was part of that study. But for example, if you're a lexical thinker, you have no problem with the idea of a blue car, right? A blue car. Fine. Nothing wrong with a blue car. Well, to a dyslexic is pictorially. The dyslexic looks at the higher order pattern of things. So it sees a car that's painted blue. They don't see blue being made into a car. That's the way a dyslexic mind thinks. But this may help and illustrate how Hebrew works. Hebrew looks at the object and then further defines the object. So it's a car that is blue, that has a 450 V8, and so on and so forth. So the attributes come after the object. English puts the attributes before the object. So that would explain how you can have different word orders on things. Now, the particular part of this verse that I'm really sticking to is when we talk about rejecting my laws, spurning my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments. So we can take real quick look at this verse, and we can even see it within the English, that the commandments are the root, and the laws and the rulings are to support the Torah. Now, quite often, and I've seen this done, where you take a ruling, you'll take a law and use that as a means to define the commandment rather than vice versa. Now, I know a lot of people out there saying, yeah, those rabbis, those Jews, they forsake the Torah, the commandments. Um, well, it's interesting because I had Christian evangelists come up to me all the time. They're creating their own rules. They're interpreting the Torah, the commandments, according to their customs and rulings, their laws and rulings. You see how that works? So we're all guilty of it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not putting anyone down. We're just all guilty of it. Because why? We live in a physical realm. As a student of Kabbalah, we are taught that 99% of reality is in the spiritual and 1% is in the physical. But we act as though, and we're so focused on the physical that the physical becomes our 99% and the spiritual becomes our 1%. So it's only natural that we would flip this over. And what we need to do is flip it the other way. That's why I promote down on my playlists below in the description, you will see Meditation 201, where I talk about the mind, body, and, or I should say, the soul, mind, and body, which is the proper order. But we tend to live as body, mind, soul in our thinking and our priorities. So you can see that the commandments are to support these things. I'll give you a big example. We are taught that we cannot have beef and milk, the mother's milk. All right, fine. I have a little bit of an issue with it, but let's just take it for sake of argument. This also means you can't have chicken. And I used to argue with people saying, well, I never saw anyone milk a chicken. So what's the issue? And I had a heated discussion with a retired rabbi about this. I said, but the Torah tells us beef. You even agree with it. Even the Talmud tells you this. And that person said to me, well, no, it's prohibited. I said, the Talmud says it's not prohibited. The Torah says it's not prohibited. See, that's an example of it being backwards. So let's talk a little more about each one of these words. Now, we see the laws, and there you go. So what's a law? Well, this can be translated in different ways, but what's interesting is it can mean customs, a custom. Now, how does a custom, how is it derived, a custom? Well, a custom is, in Judaism, a lot of times, if you do something three times, it becomes a custom. It becomes the way you should be practicing. You have to understand, don't belittle the Jewish community for this. Why? Because they believe in consistency. In other words, they try to practice what they preach and they preach what they practice. Very few religious people do that. A lot of religious people come with exceptions of why they shouldn't. Now, in saying that, I'm not saying you have to practice these things. This is where we have to engage our mind and start thinking of things and say, what do the commandments in the Torah tell us to do this? No, it doesn't. Or yes, it does. Or it doesn't really specify. but it's not a bad idea. So as a community, we may want to do this. To kind of step in this a little more, I've seen a lot of people, they do conversions where they say, oh, okay, well, I want to join Judaism. Fine. Any rabbi worth his weight in salt, worth his weight in gold, will tell you that to get to that point of wanting a conversion, you've already converted yourself at a spiritual level. So what's the purpose of conversion? And this is where people don't realize they're used to other religious ways in which you profess something and now you become converted. That's not the way it works within Judaism. What you're doing is you decide on the community you want to live with. You want to live with Kabbalah. You want to live with um, certain Orthodox groups, or maybe Reformed, or maybe some. What the conversion is doing is helping you to understand the standards of the community you're joining. That's all that's about. So if you and so a convert, that's why a conversion is not acceptable from one necessarily convert acceptable from one organization to the next, or a sect of Judaism, or a particular Orthodox group of Judaism, things like that. That's why we may not be accepted in another one. Even being as a Jew, you will not be necessarily accepted. I have paperwork to show I have three mothers, and yet I've been told I'm not a good enough Jew by an Orthodox rabbi to join them. Not that I was looking to join them, but I was looking for getting involved with some studies. Just wasn't good enough to them. So that's how that works. So the laws, that's a custom. Okay. How do customs develop? Well, it's there to enforce, to create a certain standard of life. Now we have rulings. The rules here. Now, the rulings are, well, in this particular case, what's the rulings? Who set up a system to Jethro, all the way back in chapter 19 of Exodus? Jethro says, Moses, you're working too hard. You're frustrating yourself, you're frustrating the people. Stop it. Have those that are in charge of tens and fifties and hundreds and thousands. If that doesn't work, then they come to you. In other words, he was the Supreme Court ruling. So all these people work together to create these rulings. And these rulings were what? A communal way of getting together. Now, I've seen people chastise the Jewish community and say, oh, all those laws, you're ridiculous. You should, yeah, why do you have to live by law? We're free. Are we? Those very same people that say that, they obey the law. Even if it's anti-constitutional, they obey the law. Are they really free? No. They're following the rules of the land. And yet they're chastising somebody else for doing the same thing. We Americans, a lot of times, have double standards. Well, let's just be realistic. Now, let's read on and see what it says. And it says, so that you do not observe all my commandments. So a lot of times, the rulings and your customs will contradict the commandments. That's where the real issue is. You have laws that are against the Constitution. You need to judge it by the Constitution and not. And we're full of laws against the Constitution. Don't fool yourself. So we need to double check our rulings and our customs according to the commandments. Now, there's one more aspect I want to tell you, and this will help you understand this a little more. If you go into the Zohar and you search for written Torah, obviously in the English version, or the oral Torah, you will come to some passages that will reveal to you that the written Torah was given to us by theiir. It was given to us by the energy force that's behind theiir, which means beauty, harmony, and balance. Often known as the Lord your God. Now understand, when you say Lord your God, we're not saying a title and God. We're not saying that God is the Lord. We're not saying that God is the king. It's not a title. The Lord your God is two names brought together in a beauty, harmony, balance, and it's a single name. The two words themselves is the name. It's not a title and name. It is the name. That's what gave us the written Torah. The oral Torah comes to us by way of Malkut, which represents, I want to say this correctly, is where the rubber meets the road, where we attempt to take what we were given in the written and apply it to the physical realm. And how I say this with a little bit of trepidation, because what was true yesterday may not be true today. What was true 100 years ago may not be true today. What was true 1,000 years ago may not be true today. Technology changes. I'm not saying that because of our new cooking methods, we can eat pork. It's okay. No, 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 no. That's not the way this works. We are told not to touch pork. So we do not. I know I don't. I don't touch it. Don't give me this cooking technology explanation. And it's proven to be wrong as well. Because the cooking methods have not been able to kill off all the parasites and bacteria that's in pork that is very, very bad for you. But that's a physical layer. So when we create these rulings and we create these customs, they have to become adaptable and changeable as society adapts and changes. For example, we live in an English society. So we have English customs. We have English. When I say English, I'm talking about the language English. I'm not talking about the UK necessarily. But we have it influences us. It influences culture, our thinking, and so on and so forth. So our customs and our rulings have to be different for each different language and culture. So this sentence here, verse 15, is speaking volumes. So we have to constantly double check our customs, double check our rulings, so that we take the commandments and truly make them effective. Now, keeping status quo is not a bad thing, but adapting to new cultural norms is something you also need to do. So you don't make changes, you don't take it lightly to change things, but you also don't take things lightly not to change things. It takes a tightrope walk in order to come up with the proper rulings and the proper customs. And here we go. I bet you're saying, holy mackerel. I can't believe that I learned more from this one verse just by digging into it than I did from the rest of the Torah portion or rest of the passage that I was reading. So I hope this helps, and I hope this helps you understand help you become a better educated consumer of Scripture. Now, I work with the Tanakh. I call that the True Testament. The True Testament has not been done away with. It has not been replaced. The customs and some of the rulings may be changed, but the commandments themselves have not changed. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Shalom, shalom.